a place where you can combine romance, open world, and travel to other dimensions. A game in which you can plunge headlong into another reality and divide life into before and after. This is how you can describe the fantasy VR game called Chrono Life. And everything would be fine if another player in knight's armor hadn't insulted the hero by refusing to join the team. Another female sorceress participant tried to explain their refusal more politely, apologizing for her comrade, while a muscular man with scars on his shoulders stood behind and looked at the guy with disdain. And when all the members of the guild had already gone forward, even the little boy, holding a lollipop in his hand, could not help but laugh at the hero and his clothes. And so it was with every team John tried to join, so at some point he was left completely alone in the middle of the street. Having heard another refusal, the guy could not stand it and swore loudly. Almost crying, the hero was angry at the game, at his poor equipment, and at the whole world. The other characters looked at him like he was crazy and mocked him and his weak equipment. But John could not accept defeat and, hearing their words, shouted that they did not understand anything, and that weapons could not be useless if a lot of gold was spent on them. Suddenly, a girl from the crowd noticed his hysteria. The guy looked up at her only when she hesitantly tried to address him, coming closer. Lilith seemed to sparkle with her beauty and innocence, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot and holding a neat staff with her thin hands. John immediately blushed, looking the girl up and down, surprised that she even approached him and asked what she wanted. With a dazzling, sparkling smile, Lilith herself invited the hero to join her team. Grinning widely, John realized that this game was the best since it had such beauties. Some time passed, and the heroes were already walking through the forest, and Lilith was praising the guy, who giggled smugly at this. John proudly boasted that he spent most of his parents' allowance on gold bars in the game, which is why he has such equipment. And the girl began to admire him again, asking how much he had already improved. John promised meaningfully that she would definitely be surprised. The guy proudly added that he bought up all the beginner sets for 55,001, as much as he could afford. With a gleam in his eyes, the hero showed off a sword from such a set. Lilith smiled dazzlingly. "Cool, you look just like a knight." At that moment, John felt as if lightning had struck him straight in the temple and in the soul. The guy went deep into himself, imagining daily walks together, smiles, laughter. How one day, surrounded by flowers, their tender first kiss in the game will happen. Or how he would one day kneel down in front of her under the rays of the setting sun. John was already imagining how paintings in a gold frame with the happiest moments of their lives would hang on the snow-white wall of their shared home. And of course, as a little girl, she will meet him with her mother after work. Lost in his dreams, the guy was already thinking about what name he could give her. Lilith's steps suddenly stopped, interrupting the hero's lost thoughts. The girl said that they had come to the right place. It turned out to be an empty space in the forest, hidden by trees. The hero was surprised by this, looking around. There was a sudden clang of the sword as its blade passed through John. The guy immediately started coughing up blood, shocked by what was happening. His base health stats instantly began to decrease. The hero fell onto the grass with a crash. Shocked, he tried to comprehend what was happening, breathing heavily as the iron taste grew stronger in his mouth. A bright red pool of blood was already forming behind him. He asked hoarsely, "For what?" trying to make out Lilith's expression. When the guy suggested that it was his weapon, a sly grin appeared on her face. The girl smiled as if nothing had happened, saying that the hero could keep this trash for himself. John was amazed by her words, not understanding if this was the same cutie that was 5 minutes ago. And Lilith added in the same tone that she lured him into the forest, away from prying eyes, in order to kill him. The guy, shocked, recalled that the girl had invited him to join the team, and she answered with a smile that she lied because she didn't need someone like him on her team. As if trying to finish him off, she unashamedly called him a poor loser. John's face was unreadable, but it was clear that her words had hit him harder than a sword to the stomach. Lilith continued that since the hero is scraping bottom even in the game, then in life, most likely, he is the same, and it is unlikely that he would not be afraid to approach her outside the game. When the girl sarcastically added that the guy's parents were also poor, his gaze darkened with anger. John clenched his teeth. Slowly, on trembling legs, he rose from his knees. In a hoarse but firm voice, he quietly said, "Enough." And a second later, his face and his eyes filled with anger as he hissed that she had crossed all boundaries. Suddenly, Lilith cut his body in half, not letting him finish. Drops of blood stained her from head to toe. The girl only snapped at his words. The hero coughed up a rag of blood as he fell to the ground. His body parts flew in different directions. At this time, the system's voice announced that Lilith had fulfilled the conditions and was eligible to move to the hidden class. The pink strands instantly turned black, starting from the ends. The neat black short dress began to transform after them, along with her staff. So it became long and white, and the staff increased in size and changed in design. Snow-white wings spread out behind her, feathers flying in all directions. The system announced that the transition was complete, and Lilith became the goddess of life. A sweet, satisfied smile touched her lips. With a charming expression, the girl rejoiced that she had finally reached 1,000 victims. She stretched as if nothing had happened, pleased with her success. Then the girl easily stepped over the hero's upper body in her white heels. She moved further and further away, glad that now she only had the main quest left. Barely keeping his eyes open as drops of blood framed his mouth, the boy realized the terrible truth about this game. It was the law of the jungle. He closed his eyes in exhaustion as the system announced that his character had died. After some time, the system's voice is heard in a small alley, informing that the hero has lost most of his experience and will be reborn in a safe place. The guy was completely reborn again, but there was no joy in his eyes. He remembered Lilith's words about him being a beggar, that he himself would never approach her outside the game. He gritted his teeth in resentment and anger. John also remembered the knight who had rudely refused him, and then about the child who made fun of him and his clothes. For several minutes, the guy stood silently, his head down, and then he began to cry uncontrollably because the little he had was also taken away from him, and even his pride was trampled. Wiping away crocodile tears, the hero reached into his pocket. John pulled out a craftsman's hammer, which improves a piece of equipment by 1. Then he pulled out the knight's sword with 3 units. With furious determination, the boy swung his weapon. When the hammer reached the sword, a halo of dust and magic surrounded the hero. The boy gritted his teeth, realizing that the best way to become stronger was to improve his equipment. The system indicated that this could not be done when the sword was broken in half. John's face was a mixture of anger and shock, but he couldn't stop himself. Following the sword, the guy pulled out bloody iron bracers. After the hammer blow, nothing was left of them either. And now, all his weapons lay like a pile of rubbish around him. The hero's lips stretched into a smile. In a strained smile, because from the loss of part of the set, he automatically loses the entire set, and therefore the clothes. A hopeless, stingy tear rolled down his cheek as John once again realized that he didn't like the game. Then a club fell at his feet with a thud. It was a beginner's weapon, and at her current level, it was almost useless. The hero looked up in surprise to see who had given it to him. A character in the most basic clothes with an unchanging smile on his face waved at him. The player continued to wave, and the boy raised an eyebrow, surprised by his strange behavior. Judging from his nondescript appearance, John realized that he was a fellow newcomer. The guy glanced down at the stick again. He couldn't believe it, but apparently this character was giving the weapon to him. The player gave a thumbs up, flashing his heroism, and the hero felt like an even bigger loser, realizing that this newbie simply took pity on him, seeing him in his underwear while the character was saying goodbye. For a few minutes after, John sat next to the stick, not daring to even look at it. Then he looked at the club with a glimmer of hope. Without thinking, the guy hit it with a hammer, and the system notified that his weapon had been improved by 1 unit of additional damage. The hero struck the club again, and the system's voice again confirmed the improvement in the level. A look of melancholy crossed his face at the thought that such mechanisms were always being put into completely useless objects. But then he banged the tree against the tree a couple more times, hearing the equipment improving. The additional damage of the baton was now plus on 64. John swung again, thinking that the club would soon break anyway, and the higher the level, the higher the probability of breakage. So he continued to hit the stick over and over again, over and over again. The city was already illuminated by the setting sun. The hand that the guy held the hammer in ached from tension and fatigue. Although he himself sat and was covered in sweat, shaking from head to toe, the hero bit his lower lip. With one last sharp movement, he swung and struck the club. A golden haze surrounded him, and the system again said that the equipment had been improved. The club sparkled in a golden glow with a new maximum status, level 99. With a trembling hand, John picked up the weapon, examining it in surprise. He wondered, how could a simple stick reach level 99? This was impossible because after the 10th time, the probability of success of each subsequent improvement decreases by 5%. At this point, the club slipped out of his hands. John tried to catch the slippery stick with trembling fingers. Finally, he grabbed it firmly with both hands, but the tip barely touched the ground. At that moment, the stones under the guy flew up, and he himself opened his mouth in shock. Dust, boards, pieces of tiles, stones, everything was scattered around. The earth itself was divided into 2 parts. Along with it, the planet was cut in half, and after that, the wave moved further, causing a huge explosion in the solar system. A moment later, the boy sat silently just a couple of centimeters from the destroyed ground. John screamed in fright, gradually realizing what had just happened. The players came running to the noise, also trying to understand what had happened. Some even thought it was a dragon attack. People ran in panic towards the destruction, running around John, unaware that he was the one causing it. The hero himself still sat in a stupor and looked ahead, unable to say a word. The continent in front of him split in two in a matter of moments. On that day, a new world record in VR gaming was entered into the Guinness Book of Records. The system notified John that his reputation had been increased due to the player's murder. And when such notifications started appearing again and again, it became clear that the world record was for the number of players killed with one hit. The guy realized what was happening because the notification sound did not stop. A wide grin appeared on his face, although that was all that was visible due to the setting sun. John remembered Lilith's words about his parents and his unsuccessful life. The hero continued to chuckle, his grin turning into a victorious grin. He remembered how he would pay with his life for his knowledge. Then, through my own experience, I learned about the essence of the game. The hypocrisy and cruelty of other players came to mind. This is how John learned that the law of the jungle applies in this game. The guy sat with an unreadable face, holding a baton in his hands. She was glowing with her level 99 gold status, and the hero's face shone with anger and a desire to take revenge on his offenders. In reality, the guy was a nobody, of unprepossessing appearance, of average height. He did not excel in either his studies or sports. If we were to describe his life in gaming terms, his level would be Bronze 4. The sun rose over the city again. There was a quiet rustling of bare feet on the ground. John walked slowly across the town square, wearing only his raincoat and underwear. Now something has changed in him. Suddenly he bumped shoulders with a heavyset player. The big guy turned to the guy with insults. He grabbed the hero by the chest with his large, rough hand. The man shouted that the boy was blind, and his wife, suddenly appearing behind him, smirked that John could be left alone. He was already scared. The guy didn't react to their words in any way. Here, in the game, he was different. Suddenly, the hero quietly called the player a pig's snout. The big guy clearly didn't expect this from a weak-looking loser. The man began to scream and tightened his grip, but the club had already reached his cheek. He was taken aback, noticing out of the corner of his eye a tree near his cheek. Anger appeared on his face again. The big guy yelled that the hero wouldn't do anything to him with his useless stick. But at that moment, he was prevented from finishing his sentence by a shockwave from the useless stick, knocking out his jaw. At first, the man, engulfed in golden light, flew to the side. Then the golden beam headed straight into space, where the big guy also flew. His wife recoiled in fear, and dust rose in a column around her. But John had already turned to her, his club ready. The weapon fit perfectly in his hand, as if it had been created for this very moment. Here John was invincible. In this game, he is the main character. The smug smile and the fire of revenge in his eyes never left his face. Suddenly, the system notified that the weapon's durability had dropped sharply. The club's durability level was now only 3.5. The hero looked at the club in surprise. Sometime later, John sat alone in front of the weapon in that very alley, his knees pulled up to his chest. Indignation and sadness from the inevitability mixed on his face. The status of the stick showed that due to its low durability, it would break after a couple of hits. The guy continued to stare at the club, hoping for a miracle. Then he sadly plopped down on the ground, gradually realizing that he only had 3 hits left, since he had only made 2, and his durability was down to 3.5. John continued to lie on the cold ground, looking at the sky. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he wasn't in the best position right now. He looked at the sun through the roofs of the houses, realizing his hopelessness. The hero really wanted to take revenge on those who laughed at him, and even more so to deal with Lilith. He looked at the sky for a few more minutes. Suddenly, John clenched his teeth in anger. The guy jumped to his feet in one movement. The hero whispered that he still had 3 hits. An unexpected determination appeared in his eyes again. A gloomy place full of skeletons and sharp rocks. The Valley of the Dead. John stepped forward, stepping on another skull, although the entire road was paved with them. His expression was unreadable, but there was definitely no fear there. The hero muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Suddenly, some kind of lilac glow appeared from behind the rocks. The guy turned around at some noise in that direction. His face was covered with a shadow of determination. Suddenly, John was surrounded by columns of dust. Huge purple eye lights sparkled out of the darkness. The terrifying 2-headed dragon appeared in all its glory. The entire cave shook from the menacing roar of both heads, But the hero looked at him imperturbably. As the game's strongest boss swung his huge paw, he creaked in a creepy voice. "Insignificant mortal." The beast moved towards the guy, squealing loudly that he had crossed the line of the dead. Rocks crumbled, skulls flew from side to side, but John stood his ground when the system explained that in front of him was the two-headed dragon Eurus. The monster approached the guy, shouting that this place was the line between life and death. The dragon cried out that the hero was a fool and was now doomed to eternal torment. But at that moment, he was abruptly cut off by a golden light from John's club. A moment later, only a trace remained of the monster's head. The beast looked at his missing part with surprise, and the hero picked up the club from the place where the force of the blow had formed a black hole. John whispered quietly that he only had 3 hits left. The dragon looked at the absolutely calm guy in shock. At that moment, the system announced that John had 2 hits left, and he thoughtfully scratched his back with his baton. And then he shouted, looking threateningly at the monster, that he would kill it if its strength was not enough for more. The beast recoiled in fear. The dragon immediately began to beg the guy to wait. John continued to scratch his back, looking at the monster skeptically. The beast begged the hero to let him speak and call him boss. John skeptically asked if Eurus had just called him a fool, to which the beast immediately began to justify himself, saying that according to the plot, he was obliged to say this. The dragon swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his mouth. The beast asked who the hero was anyway. To this, John grumbled that Eurus should not bother him. He would kill the dragon anyway. Not giving the beast a choice, the guy swung his club. Everything around was illuminated with a golden glow. The monster roared, flying back. With a crash, the dragon fell onto the skeletons. He was breathing heavily, blood flowing into a pool from his huge mouth. John clicked his tongue in irritation, and Eurus, as if he had learned the whole essence of existence, was unable to rise. The club's durability was now only 1 of 5, meaning the hero only had 1 hit left. John sighed, frustrated that he couldn't do anything about the durability. The monster heard this and it dawned on him. Eurus hopefully offered to inhabit John's weapon. The hero scratched the back of his head with his club, realizing that the dragon could have deceived him. Then he asked again what the dragon meant. Suddenly, the guy received a notification about a pact in which Eurus voluntarily gives him his soul. John didn't know whether to accept the task from the system. Taking advantage of the guy's confusion, Eurus asked if he had heard anything about ego swords. The hero didn't know about this and asked for clarification. Eurus muttered that it would take a long time to explain, to which John asked to be brief. Then the beast said that he would inhabit the hero's weapon. He explained that the weapon would thus have a soul and would evolve into an ego sword. But when the dragon added that to all this there would also be infinite durability, the hero had an idea. Eurus assured that the ego sword was the most powerful weapon in Chrono Life, and John suddenly giggled. Then a loud laughter echoed throughout the cave, bouncing off the walls. The dragon laughed awkwardly along with him. He tried to ask if his boss agreed with the proposal, while the guy continued to laugh uncontrollably. Having calmed down, John muttered that he had changed his mind about taking revenge. And then he grinned evilly, seeing how much the game wanted him to do it. Eurus trembled with fear when he saw the crazy expression on the hero's face, and mentally asked his mother to take him away from there. With a wide grin, John clicked the accept button, and the system responded that the quest was accepted. Suddenly, a huge purple pentagram appeared below him. The pentagram stretched out under Eurus, and the lilac light spread throughout the cave. Gradually, the huge dragon wings began to disappear. When the dragon itself dissolved into the program codes, the system announced that Eurus's physical body had disappeared. A purple glow enveloped the club, as the system's voice confirmed that the monster's soul had entered the weapon. From then on, the baton's status was highlighted in purple, and the weapon's class became Ego, and its durability was equal to infinity. A wide grin spread across John's face. But before he could celebrate, he heard rustling sounds. Monsters from all corners climbed straight towards the hero. They shouted that their master demanded revenge. Loud roars and cries of "Revenge! Revenge!" could be heard from everywhere. While the beasts cried out for retribution, John stood motionless, not even moving. The army of Eurus, mingling together, stood like a wall, and in front of them the hero looked very small. The guy grinned evilly. "Well, then I will take revenge." For a second, the image of Lilith appeared in his memory. He raised his club up and shouted loudly, "Revenge!" echoing the cries of the dragons. The baton's beam once again hit the planet and reached space. At this time, the city, despite the serene sky, was also restless. The players crowded around a board with someone's face and the words "Wanted" written on it. Everyone understood that the wanted man was dangerous and were tense. The guard standing next to the board announced an SSS rank reward for the villain's head. People became even more tense when they heard that this villain had killed over 800,000 people in one day, which was the worst mass murder in the history of the game. The bounty notices for his head were spread throughout all 12 kingdoms, on all 3 continents. They were on every street, even the smallest one, on every corner. The guard announced that the reward was 1 trillion gold. The players whispered in shock, not believing in such a huge reward. Then the sound of marching footsteps was heard. Soldiers in golden armor with shields of the same color walked in a row. The players realized that these were not just knights. After all, each of their armors had the coat of arms of the royal guard engraved on it. People noticed the one who commanded them walking in the distance. The leader of the Golden Guild was a beautiful girl named Andrea. On the other side were soldiers in red cloaks with white crosses embroidered on them. The leader of the White Crosses Guild was Stanford, and his right eye bore scars reminiscent of his exploits. The army in caps and purple robes was already lined up in rows. The leader of the Holy Land Guild was the most powerful sorceress in the kingdom, Gloris. Following them, the Robin Hood Thieves Guild appeared, led by Duncan. And behold, the silver armor sparkled in the sun. Another army followed after the others. The blue flag fluttered in the wind. The knights with the azure coat of arms stepped aside to let the leader through. It was Hawkeye, the king of this country, who commanded the Guild of Justice. The players watched what was happening in amazement, because the 5 strongest guilds gathered in one place for the first time. The alliance of these 5 flags was the strongest alliance in the world. Hawkeye spoke up as the leader of the World Alliance. The Knights of the 5 flags stood motionless, awaiting orders. The entire alliance listened in anticipation as he declared all-out war on the mass murderer of players, to the one whose face is imprinted on the arrest warrant. Meanwhile, John was studying the new club with its current characteristics. The guy looked at the weapon thoughtfully. Then he grinned, baring his teeth. His laughter echoed down the now familiar alley. Suddenly, Urus emerged from the weapon, glad that his boss was in a good mood, and the hero screamed in surprise. John was scared that someone's head was sticking out of his club and asked what kind of creature was in front of him. The beast introduced itself as a 2-headed dragon. John was surprised when he looked at the little animal. He remembered the huge monster from the cave, and then he looked again at the little creature from the club. Urus reminded that he had already said, "His soul will inhabit the hero's weapon." The little dragon added that this was a normal occurrence for weapons of the ego level, and only the hero could see and hear it. But the guy didn't listen very closely, being touched by the dragon's new form. John replied that he generally understood, but he was curious as to where the beast's second head had gone. At first, Urus didn't understand what the question was about. Then he turned his head to the side and saw that an important body part was missing. And then he sadly asked where she really went. Then a piece of paper flew towards them. The hero picked up the leaflet that had flown away. His face was emblazoned in the center with a huge sign about the reward. To say that he was surprised is to say nothing. And looking at the sky, the hero saw that there were thousands of these leaflets, on the walls of any building, everywhere where people walked. His face was in every available place. Urus immediately squealed in delight. The beast circled around John, praising his boss that there was no way a dragon could kill 800,000 people with one blow. Urus rejoiced that they would even give real money for the hero, a whole trillion. At this time, John asked, while chewing chicken, if NPS like Urus could say anything about real money, since they don't know about it. To this, the little animal replied that he didn't care. He was already in the next world. Urus changed the subject to the hero, asking what he planned to do since they would hunt him day and night. The little beast asked in a terrifying tone, "Shouldn't we deal with humanity right now, boss?" The guy thought, continuing to chew. He looked again at the fallen leaflets. John chuckled as he looked at his portrait. The hero chuckled maliciously, thinking how cool it really was to feel like a celebrity, and Urus tensed up again. The guy calmed down and said with a smile that he would act according to the LPS principle. Urus naturally asked what he was talking about. The hero explained that this is a technique where a very powerful and strong character pretends to be weak and harmless. The beast asked why John should tolerate being treated like a loser, ignored and despised. To which the guy replied with a smile, "You don't understand anything." He added that it's cool when no one around knows that the person in front of them is not just a weakling, but the main character of the game. John continued to say that he would enjoy a peaceful life in the game when suddenly an arrow pierced his back. Urus looked at this in shock, unable to say a word. The arrow passed through the boy's body, and its tip sparkled on the other side. A bloody cough escaped his throat. The guy fell flat on the ground. Urus shouted in panic, "Boss!" and flew up to the hero. The blue case was still full of glittering arrows. The next one has already been pulled onto the bowstring. Hawkeye stood on the roof of one of the buildings, and behind him was a huge army of the Justice Guild. It was he who shot these arrows. The sound of knights' footsteps could be heard from afar. The menacing march could be heard from the other side as well. The hero lay motionless on the road. In a moment, he was surrounded by a huge army led by the king. Hawkeye ordered John to be captured and imprisoned. The guy continued to lie there, unable to move. The knights shouted in one voice, "It will be done!" The frightened dragon tried to bring the hero to his senses, shouting that people, although weak, in such numbers would definitely defeat him. Meanwhile, the knights were getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the guy sat up, coughing up blood again. First, John got down on one knee, and then, on trembling legs, he rose completely. The army tensed, preparing their weapons. Hawkeye shouted that there would be no mercy for the villain. The knights rushed to attack. Urus continued to nervously fly around his boss, and John gritted his teeth and hissed, "I've changed my mind." With a sharp jerk, he pulled the arrow out of himself. The guy threw it aside as if nothing had happened. His free hand gripped his baton tightly. Looking at all the players who were against him, the hero concluded that he no longer liked living by the LPS principle. A wide, sinister grin spread across his face as he shouted that they had asked for it. A golden beam pierced the solid ground, and along with it, part of the army. The golden light also engulfed Hawkeye, who opened his mouth in surprise. The flash of the impact once again reached the universe. People, like bugs, spread out on the ground. The leader was breathing heavily, unable to rise. He couldn't believe that just one blow had caused him so much damage. All the buildings in this place were razed to the ground, not to mention the people. Inexpressible horror passed over the king's face. The capital of the First Kingdom was destroyed in one fell swoop. The hero had already approached the Hawk's Eye. The man tensed even more, and John walked calmly and waddlingly over the soldiers' bodies. Hawkeye began to rummage through his inside pocket. He suddenly pulled out a one-use summoning crystal that would summon any number of players to help him. Without further ado, the king smashed the ball in his fist, and its fragments began to glow with a blue light. A blue pentagram surrounded the man, creating a cylindrical barrier around him. There were more and more of these pentagrams. They surrounded John. Hawkeye called out to all members of the United Forces Guild. The blue glow grew brighter as the system announced a mass teleportation of players. Hordes of new soldiers appeared inside the pentagrams in an instant. There were more and more of them. John looked around, realizing he was surrounded again. Meanwhile, the knights gradually surrounded him. The guy now had nowhere to run. The Guild of United Forces was huge. There are approximately 3 million of them in total, and all of them teleported to the battlefield at once. The king pointed his finger at the hero. Then he shouted, "Charge the villain!" People rushed towards John without question. The guy sighed without moving from his spot. With a sharp movement, he swung his club. A golden streak pierced and divided the earth. The soldiers, along with the strongest generals, fell powerlessly from the beam's effects. Urus looked at this picture in amazement. John swung his club again. A gust of air followed her, and another shockwave passed through the guild. Urus became more and more stunned. He remembered shouting that people were weak, but not when they were in large numbers. The simple truth dawned on the dragon. Even if Urus is the strongest boss in this world, he is not able to defeat all players at the same time. He could only defeat such elite warriors from all over the world by summoning his own army. That's why he was sure that it was better to get out of there, but John was stronger. The warriors in red armor now sharpened their swords. The general was more confident of his victory than ever, despite the heavy losses. The Red Crosses pounced on John, but he did not react. And even when the blades glittered right above his head, the guy didn't move. John flashed a grin and pulled the baton out from his bosom again. The golden light pierced through another batch of enemies. It spread even further, dividing the continent again. At this time, the most powerful witch whispered a spell into her purple staff. She was guarded by magicians, located in another blue pentagram. John took notice of this. Suddenly, a new pentagram appeared above his head, and Glorus cast a spell of ancient destructive magic. The pentagram swirled in the air. John watched this with surprise, and just a second later, a huge magical beam from the pentagram suddenly headed straight at him. John muttered under his breath that the spell sounded really cool. Illuminated by the beam, the guy added that he would also need a spell for his attacks. John pulled the club from behind his back again. The power of the weapon once again pierced the planet, and with it the solar system. And the name of this technique was Annihilation. In the middle of the pentagram, there was only a hole and a light haze around the edges, and then her sides began to crack. and suddenly the whole structure shattered like a mirror. The girl screamed, realizing that her ancient spell was broken. She called over the royal mages, preparing to give the command. But then they noticed John raising his stick above his head. The hero said quietly but firmly, "Blow." A golden glow pierced the space from the earth to the sky, and the magicians also flew off in different directions. John was fighting alone against 3 million people, and while it wasn't exactly spectacular, it was definitely a disaster for the players. The entire Guild of United Forces was completely defeated. Hawkeye sat among a pile of lifeless bodies. He was shaking, his breathing was ragged, and his heart was pounding in his temples. The man muttered the same thing under his breath, not believing that such a thing was even possible. And John had already approached him, blocking the sun. The guy said he wouldn't kill him, even though he was the one who made him lose his temper. Hawkeye asked why in surprise. At this, the hero sighed with a smile, and he reminded the man that it was Hawkeye who shot him with a bow. The king was frightened, tears sprang to his eyes, but at that moment the club had already touched his jaw. As expected, the battle was on everyone's lips. This situation interested even those who don't play games at all. The hero stood among a mountain of dead people on the half-destroyed land of a once beautiful continent. The club glittered in the setting sun. The guy frowned, looking at the weapon. Finally, Eurus emerged from the stick, rejoicing that his boss had been great, and John was relieved that the dragon had not disappeared. Suddenly, the sound of snow-white heels was heard. The guy turned around at the sound. The female silhouette approached John with calm grace. The hero was surprised that someone else remained alive. He started to say how annoying it was, but suddenly the girl's familiar features became clear in his eyes. They stood opposite each other, illuminated by the orange light of the sunset. It was Lilith herself. For a few seconds, John stood in a stupor. Then his surprise turned to anger. At this, a slight smile touched her lips. She said in a charming tone, "Long time no see, Mr. Loser." The sun was setting over an endless expanse strewn with the bodies of 3 million people. Countless swords and spears were scattered across the ground. The hero thought that his second meeting with this girl was quite fateful. Her taunts came back to me again. The hand holding the club trembled with anger. John clenched his teeth, the veins in his neck standing out. But for some reason at that moment he felt like laughing. They stood facing each other for a few more moments. Lilith asked him how he was doing with a charming smile. She also noted that she certainly didn't expect to meet him in such circumstances, but fate itself brought them together. The guy replied with a crooked smile that he understood perfectly well. She was looking for him with the intention of killing him. The girl smiled slightly. "Is that what you think of me?" she asked, almost affectionately. The hero frowned again, her calmness getting on his nerves. He then said that he would have split her skull open right there, but he had questions. He looked at the girl and then asked why her hair was a different color. Lilith giggled, glad that he noticed. She recalled that killing a hero in the past was a sacrifice that helped her enter a new hidden class, the goddess of life. I remembered her transformation and the phrase about the long-awaited 1,000 victims. Lilith lost with a lock of hair, explaining that this was the reason why her hair color changed. John listened carefully to all this. Then the guy sighed, not reacting in any way. The baton was already pointed towards the girl. John asked why she was the goddess of life and not death, even though she sacrificed 1,000 players. But his threatening gesture did not bother her at all. She smiled wider, replying that it was indeed funny. "You'll die laughing?" John hissed furiously. He slammed his club down on the ground where she was, but Lilith had already flown up. John hissed that he had his answers, and now it was time to teach her a lesson. Lilith asked, a little disappointed why so quickly. And a new blow pierced the earth in its place. The hero stood on the destroyed land, among smoke and dust. He looked up, looking for where she had flown to again. "What a pity!" the girl exclaimed through the dust. The guy shuddered, realizing that she was behind him, and the girl added that she would like to talk some more. He ran furiously towards her, clutching a weapon in his hand. Another blow from the club passed along the ground, and the golden light took the girl with it. The ground in that place split in half. Urus cried out in delight that it was a direct hit. The dragon was sure that now his master had caught this slippery herring. John chuckled that people like her only knew how to bluff. But then a silhouette with a staff appeared from the fog again. The hero's eyes widened in surprise. In the huge hole left by the blow from the stick stood a completely unharmed Lilith. She smiled and admitted that the guy had become much stronger, but it is impossible to defeat her with this club. Urus, in fear, pressed himself against his master's face. John, screaming that the girl had survived even after that. While the hero tried to remove the dragon from himself, the girl looked at it motionless. She was no longer smiling, but she looked very intently. And then Urus noticed her gaze. He couldn't believe it, but it seemed she saw him, although no one except the owner could. Finally, the hero tore the dragon away from himself and returned to the conversation. He was sure he had hit her right, but there wasn't a scratch on her. The girl replied that she was the goddess of life, and he was a mere mortal. He will never kill the goddess. The guy took the information calmly. Scratching the back of his head with a stick, he said with a smile that he was incredibly angry, and he suddenly ran up to her again. John swung his club furiously. He approached her in a matter of seconds, but there was a deathly calm on the girl's face. There was a loud roar from the impact force. The boy swung his stick again, and again the earth was pierced by a blow. The hero did not stop his lightning-fast strikes. The explosion reached the solar system, piercing the planet through and through. Urus watched this from a distance, but the tremors of the earth were hard to miss. The dragon was afraid that at this rate his boss would destroy the entire planet. But Lilith didn't care. The fog and dust cleared and she spread her wings. The condescending smile never left her face. The girl flew above the hero, showing that she was always one step ahead. John was starting to get tired of this. He was breathing heavily, clearly tense. Lilith's snow-white wings spread out again, and a moment later they began to disappear, leaving behind a trail of feathers. The girl landed smoothly. The sight of her neat heels contrasted sharply with the ruined ground. With a smile, she assumed that John missed her madly, thought about her, dreamed of revenge. The girl, clicking her heels, came closer and closer. Lilith assured that no matter how much time passed, no matter how hard he tried to become stronger, the guy would not be able to kill her. Her face was inches from his as she finished the sentence with a venomous smile. John frowned and closed his eyes. The guy sighed boredly. He turned around demonstratively. His steps gradually moved away from her. Lilith asked if he was giving up so easily. John didn't react to this in any way, but only began to warm up his right hand with the baton. A few minutes later, he replied that he was trying to see how much force he could put into a blow to break through. The girl smiled and again reminded him that he couldn't kill her. But John interrupted mid-sentence, adding that he would be breaking through the planet, not her. His answer even seemed to intrigue the girl. He turned to her and asked with an almost insane grin, "Since I can't defeat you, maybe I should destroy this planet?" Finally, the smile disappeared from her face. She quietly said that his train of thought was interesting. But could a mere mortal like him do something like that? He replied that this is precisely why he calculates the force of the blow. He remembered that he had hit the ground many times today, but all these blows were far from full force. Lilith tensed even more, a shadow of anger appearing on her face. She asked if the guy had taken into account that he would die with her, especially since he himself was mortal. Her question about whether he was ready to die for revenge stirred up old grievances in him. John has already paid with his life for knowing the laws of this world. He suddenly chuckled softly. Again, I remembered the beginning of his journey through insults and rejection, and the quiet giggling turned into uncontrollable laughter. The hero learned the law of the jungle from his own bitter experience. Having finished laughing, he continued speaking. His motivation was not simply blind revenge. But someone like you can't understand, the hero concluded. Yes, it would be revenge that would lead to his own demise. But he had nothing to lose in the first place, and even less so when the club was over his head. Lilith visibly tensed, not expecting such determination. She tried to stop him by taking a couple of steps back. But John had already raised his hand above the ground, intending to finish what he had started. The end of the club touched the floor with a rustling sound. Everything around shook. The earth seemed to be splitting at the seams. Finally, fear appeared on Lilith's face. Urus also flew out of the club in horror. And on the hero's face there was a mad, victorious grin. The force of his blow literally cut through the ground like a watermelon. In an instant, it swallowed the entire planet, and a moment later the planet turned into a glowing ball. Before it exploded into 1,000 pieces, the blast wave illuminated everything around. The light was so bright that it was reflected even in the darkness of the solar system. It was incredibly blinding and equally terrifying. Suddenly, a wall of binary code appeared in place of the planet. Meanwhile, in the real world, in the game capsule building, the huge blue hall of VR capsules, as always, worked continuously in silence and tranquility. Only one man sat among the capsules with a bored look. Someone's obscene language caught his attention. Players climbed out of their capsules one after another, cursing that they had been kicked out of Chrono Life. They were all puzzled as to why they had been thrown out. And then everyone turned to that same admin, intending to get answers to the curses. In response, the admin tried to calm them down. He explained that the problem was not with him or with electricity. One player suggested that there was a problem with the server, to which others responded with skepticism. Suddenly, one guy received a notification about an update on the game page. The creators reported that there was indeed a technical error on the server and promised to fix it and later explain what the cause was. However, one capsule was still working. A man's silhouette and the words "occupied" were visible on it. And in the game, there was still a wall of binary code. The system was rebooting, counting players and identifying them. After some manipulation, the system's voice announced that there was only one player in the game. At this time, John stood among the cells and digital codes. The guy looked around in amazement, wondering where he was. The hero took a couple of steps forward in space. He scratched the back of his head in confusion, as if remembering that he was not here. ST-389, came a voice from behind. Someone in yellow slippers approached the hero, adding that this was the name of the planet he had destroyed. The stranger came closer, saying that it was one of the most beautiful planets in the fourth universe. The man did not react to the hero's skeptical reaction, but added that it was his mother's favorite planet. John frowned as he looked at the stranger, and after a few seconds he asked who was in front of him. "Me?" the man asked mysteriously. He was silent for a few moments. Then he smiled broadly, and then, with a mad grin, he introduced himself as the creator. John was silent for a while, but he exhaled with a smile, not at all embarrassed by the expression on his interlocutor's face. "The creator is the creator," he replied, before asking if the man had seen a dark-haired girl there. To this, the stranger replied that there was no one else except the two of them, which amazed the hero. Here, John received a notification that there was only one player on the server, and the creator added that the guy killed everyone himself. And finally, it dawned on the hero. No one would have survived such a large-scale explosion. And when the man added that there was no one left alive, John chuckled. The stranger was taken aback, not understanding such a reaction, and the hero laughed uncontrollably. He exulted, "Revenge!" raising his club above his head. While the guy continued to rejoice, the stranger still stood in a stupor. John then turned to Urus, wanting to share with him the joy of the revenge that had been accomplished. But the stick in his hand showed no signs of life. The hero began to curse, trying to pull the dragon out. The stranger again spoke up, saying that there were only two of them. John looked at him and frowned. The man added that the animal was not with them either. The guy skeptically asked who was in front of him, if there was only one player on the server. The hero asked whether he was an NPS or a developer. The man began to answer that he was neither, but suddenly a blur appeared in his throat, and instead of a voice, a machine-like crackle was heard. The creator continued to speak through the crackling noise, and it was impossible to hear him. Then he sighed with a smile. As if nothing had happened, the man scratched the back of his head and said that there was already interference. Here, the space under the heroes began to disappear. John looked down in confusion. The man added that it was a shame to say goodbye so quickly, but it was nice to meet him. He then waved and asked me to say hello to someone named Furry. John opened his mouth in shock, trying to stop him. But at that moment, the space disappeared even more, blurring the stranger. Everything around disappeared under the bright light, and then the cells began to crumble and fall like shards of a mirror. The system's voice announced that the hero had been kicked out of the game. The wall of endless code appeared again. It was still quiet in the VR room. Only the hero's capsule showed signs of life. The door gradually began to open, filled with steam. With a distinctive click, the door opened completely. John took off his VR glasses. He was clearly very irritated. "Why did you even show up if you didn't say anything?" The guy was indignant. John continued to grumble, not noticing that there was a man sitting opposite him, surrounded by bodyguards. The man kept looking at John through his dark glasses and smoked an expensive cigar. Suddenly, he stood up, revealing an expensive white suit. The blonde walked towards John, followed by his bodyguard. Walking slowly forward, the man said the hero's exact age, name, and how much time he spent in the game. The guards stood like a wall when the stranger added that the guy's favorite weapon was a level 99 baton. As he checked to see if everything was correct, his massive figure loomed menacingly over John. The guy answered in the affirmative with a trembling voice and asked who was in front of him. The man slowly took off his sunglasses. And then, with a dangerous flash of his blue eyes, he replied that he was the one who had come for his club. John is a 21-year-old college student and a fan of the game Chrono Life. During his entire playing career, he never rose above the amateur level, but he was lucky and was able to upgrade a regular club to level 99+. Then he was able to take revenge on everyone he didn't like, and even to this sweet-looking lady. He dealt with her best of all. Along with it, the planet was also destroyed. Then someone appeared who called himself the creator. although he disappeared as suddenly as he came. Under the light of the moon and a canvas of stars in the sky, skyscrapers rise above the city, casting reflections from their windows onto the sidewalks. A small restaurant with a bright neon sign was guarded by men in formal dark gray suits with expensive cars parked around it. The description on the sign on the front stated that the establishment specialized in making rice soups. On the table made of warm light brown wood, there was a large black bowl, enveloped in the delicate aroma of soup with white sauce plates around the edges. Surrounded by menacing-looking men in formal suits, John and that same stranger sat at this table. Bringing another spoon to his mouth, the man ordered the hero to eat, noting that the owner of the restaurant was an old friend of his, and that she cooked just fine. The guy repeated after his interlocutor with a trembling hand while his whole body was trembling, and beads of sweat from tension and fear were gathering on his forehead. Suddenly, the blonde, as if not noticing John's anxiety, indulged in memories of how often he visited this establishment during his distant, poor youth. He added with a smile that it was about 15 years ago, and he founded the company when Chronolife was still in the development stage. At the man's last phrase, the hero was suddenly struck by a realization. A guess sparkled in his eyes. John, trying to formulate a clear answer, began to mumble and stutter, confused, while his interlocutor serenely enjoyed his food. Then the hero cried out that he thought of the man as a mafia leader, but he didn't even want to guess who the people around them were. But it turned out that they were employees. The developer of the hero models on the right, the sound engineer in the middle, and the head of the marketing department on the left. John admitted that, mistaking the developer for a mafioso, he almost fainted from fear, and then asked why he needed the hero. After listening to the screams, the man, continuing to eat his soup calmly, replied that he had already mentioned this earlier at the gaming club. The atmosphere suddenly became tense as he repeated that he had come for the boy's wooden club, as it was extremely valuable. John felt a bead of sweat roll down his cheek again, as he asked confusedly what that meant. The developer responded that it was perfectly normal for him to take buggy items from players, especially ones of this magnitude. John almost jumped out from behind the table, indignant that he personally upgraded his weapon without using anything from outside. But the guy stopped short when the man's voice suddenly became even more serious, and all his arguments were immediately blocked by the phrase, 3%. This was the probability of successful improvement after the 10th time, and with subsequent times it decreased more and more. The blonde pierced the hero with a direct gaze, firmly asking if he understood what this meant. John was perfectly aware of his interlocutor's words and then remained silent, looking away. Even if it wasn't a bug, the chances of getting a club at that level in such a short time are almost impossible. The hero continued to silently look at the table, not raising his gaze to the developer, feeling completely defeated. With a heavy sigh, the man finally said that, as the creator of the game, he would confiscate the club from the guy. The night sky, strewn with stars and flooded with the lights of the city's 24-hour signs, remained in a tense silence. Finally, a new day arrived, and the game location was illuminated by the scorching afternoon sun. It rose high above the picturesque green forest of the Rocky Front County. The calm was interrupted by the menacing roar of an animal with a huge, stinking mouth full of sharp, rotten teeth. The giant, hairy mutant bull Gortys, level 21, flashed its small, round eyes predatorily. Meanwhile, on the other side, a team of 4 players prepared for his furious attack, drawing their weapons. A beast of terrifying size rushed at them with great speed, its long and sharp horns raised. Suddenly, the fiery tip of a crystal weapon that looked like a large spear began to sparkle. One of the guild girls swung her flaming weapon, loudly chanting, "Firebolt!" Covering the entire space with red light, the girl shot a fireball at the monster. Gortys was instantly caught in a hot cage as his silhouette was slightly visible from behind the pillar of fire. His skin was quickly being burned alive and the beast roared uncontrollably, trying to break free, but it was too late. The guild leader rejoiced at their team's victory, praising the sorceress for her great efforts in the fight. Suddenly, with strange cries, another girl from the guild appeared on the battlefield preparing to attack. Continuing to scream, she got into a fighting stance, the bluish brass knuckles glinting in her fragile palm. The girl furiously rushed towards the almost defeated monster while he continued to scream, engulfed in flames. The team leader indignantly exclaimed that she should stop immediately and not do anything stupid. But at that moment, she no longer heard him, because she pounced on the beast from above, grabbing him by his massive horns. However, without hesitation, Gortys easily threw the stubborn woman back several meters, shaking his head from bottom to top. She flew head over heels, head first, straight towards the unsuspecting fire sorceress. The sorceress only managed to whisper, "Ouch!" before the inevitable collision. The sound of one girl falling onto another was so loud that the rest of the guild members immediately perked up. The other players immediately ran up to help the girls, while John watched the spectacle from the heights of the treetops. He could hear their anxious cries perfectly well, but he clearly had no intention of doing anything about it. After a long period of silent observation, the guy once again sighed tiredly, wandering in his thoughts. "What should we do now?" the hero asked out loud, as if the mountains and trees around him could answer him. Behind him at this time, the serene chomping of the little animal could be heard. Urus sat behind his master, enjoying a chicken leg and asking what the guy was planning to do now. The hero did not answer, and his face was distorted with even greater sadness from the overwhelming sadness. John again gloomily ran his hand behind him, feeling for the weapon that was glittering in the sun. He looked at her sadly, reading the footnote of the hard-to-achieve level 99 status. The hero frowned again, unable to drive away the bad thoughts and memories of yesterday's conversation. The night and that cozy little restaurant came back to mind again. And at the same time, it was far from a cozy topic of conversation. The developer repeated his words that the hero's weapons are subject to confiscation. At this, John only clenched his teeth in frustration, his palms pressing harder into the table from the tension. Suddenly, the developer added that he had been instructed to say so by the company, and John's anger turned to confusion. The man, in response to a silent question, explained that he considered this rule unfair to the players. The hero asked again, incredulously and still slightly confused, if this was really so. To this, the blonde replied that he had conducted his own investigation and had concluded that the guy's club was not a bug at all. The man eventually thought about it and decided that he would not interfere in this and would leave the hero alone. Although he did not miss the opportunity to remind that John with a club managed to kill the strongest monster. Then, using the soul of this monster, wipe 3 million innocent users off the face of the planet in one fell swoop. And then, in exactly the same way, in an instant he didn't leave a single wet spot on her. But in fact, he had and has the right to freedom of action, because he is a user of this game. With these words, the developer poured the sauce from one plate into another filled with soup. John watched him silently and in amazement, not quite believing what he had just heard. And the developer said that the guy can even add spicy radish to his rice soup if that's his choice. John listened attentively to this motivational monologue with the same amazement. The man handed him the remains of the hot radish, and the boy hesitantly took the plate in his hands. For some reason, this moment seemed special to the hero, comfortable in its own way. And suddenly, the owner of the restaurant appeared, immediately hit the developer on the back of the head and shouted at him not to spoil the food, and John quietly put the radish aside. The woman turned around and walked back, grumbling that she had been cooking beef broth all night, and they were trying to ruin it. And on the menu, there was also a soup with spicy radish, especially for the developer. There was silence at the table for a few minutes while the man looked shamefacedly into his soup and the boy moved the ill-fated plate away. After finishing these memories, the hero looked again at his recaptured club. He frowned, keeping the phrase about spicy radish rice soup in his mind. Suddenly, another scream was heard from below the tree. All members of the team turned against a certain Kate, the same girl who attacked Gorless. The guild leader shouted that the girl didn't know how to work in a team and wondered why she had gotten into trouble at all, while the sorceress tried to calm him down. The hero listened as the leader continued to shout that they shouldn't have taken it at all. He suddenly remembered the developer's only request that starry evening. As the president of Chronolife, he didn't know if he had the right to say that, but the man sincerely believed that it was a good game. It had freedom, romance, and an open world. It had no equal among its analogs, according to the director, and so the man asked not to destroy this world, but simply to enjoy his stay in it. Once again, the guy went inside himself, thinking deeply about the director's words. At that moment, a sudden, sharp sound of spitting on someone's clothes was heard from below. The demonstrative spit landed right on Kate's neat scarf, and the team leader kicked her out of the guild, saying that they would no longer raid with her. The team members all turned around and walked away, and the leader continued to grumble that it was surprising how her weapon could be like his, with such poor skills. The system immediately notified that Kate was no longer a member of the guild from that time on. John continued to silently watch this picture without interest, thinking and grieving about his own. He sighed before asking rhetorical questions into the air again. Open world? Romance? John was sure that all this was complete nonsense, and the main principle of the game was survival of the strongest. The hero remembered the president's request to simply enjoy his time in the game. Yes, the guy wanted to take everything from life, but in the way he knew how. When he wanted the radish soup to be more contrasting, he simply added more radish. He pointed the club downwards again, with the obvious intention of maiming the retreating travelers. The blow was supposed to hit the fleeing guild players straight away, and so he took a pose and was ready to swing his club right at the target. But suddenly he slipped on a rock from a loud scream and barely managed to grab the club before it fell. The hero turned around at the overly loud sound of someone swearing. Kate screamed about how she hated this game, this world, and everything in the world. She grumbled loudly that people simply didn't understand good weapons and would regret kicking her out. And they themselves are to blame for not immediately taking her seriously. A professional with first-class attributes. The girl was almost crying, angry that she had spent a lot of gold on all these useless things. John's face was unreadable as he watched her endless tirade. He remembered how he had once repeated these same words almost exactly, while in the same position. The guy was moved by her words and now looked at Kate with interest and amazement. Immediately, his memory flashed back to how everyone had refused him and rejected any attempts to join. And again, something inside him responded to the girl's furious cries, especially the part with a lot of gold spent on pointless weapons. After some time, Kate continued to cry, reassuring herself that she did not need a team. She grumbled that she would still go on raids even if she was completely alone. And while the girl walked angrily through the forest, the hero did not take his eyes off her, watching from above. Suddenly, out of the corner of Kate's ear, she heard a characteristic animal roar. Right in front of her, Gortys appeared again, his whole appearance threatening to finish what had been started. And then it turned out that the beast was far from the only one there. The sudden sight of the girl's body instantly gripped her with a primitive animal fear. The beast's huge mouth was already slowly opening in anticipation of a hearty meal. And a moment later, a general angry roar was heard from the monsters huddled together. Their red eyes, filled with animal fury, sparkled in the daylight. Without delay, the animals began to run towards the girl, drooling along the way and not forgetting to growl loudly. They approached her in an instant, and she was still in a stupor of fear. Kate closed her eyes, covering her ears with her hands and mentally preparing for imminent death. At that moment, John fearlessly jumped towards the monsters, covering her frightened form with himself. Already preparing the club for battle, the guy tried to answer the question for himself. Why did he do it? Then he swung his wooden weapon and struck the huge pile of monsters from the bottom up. This blow was strong enough to pierce this planet too. And in just a second, all that was left of the monsters was a breath of wind, and the unsuspecting Kate was hiding behind his back. She was still squinting, preparing herself for death from such a huge gathering of terrifying monsters. But when she didn't feel any pain, she still managed to force herself to open one eye. She looked up automatically and was amazed at the picture that appeared before her. A deep, bright funnel of snow-white clouds formed in the clear blue sky. The hero turned to face her, blown by the light wind after the explosion, with a slight aura of heroism. With a sparkling smile, John greeted the girl in a deliberately charming manner. He felt like a hero, even though he was wearing only a dark blue cloak that barely covered his legs. Kate's mouth opened in surprise, blushing slightly, either from the fear she had just experienced or from her raging heart. She herself was wearing a blue suit with a miniskirt and long boots that hugged her slender legs. The prologue to the hero's story was a fateful proposal under a sparkling sky. "Hey, do you want to join my team?" But the girl's sharp refusal, coupled with a middle finger, interrupted such a fateful moment. After that, she immediately turned around and walked away with lightning speed, not giving a chance for objection. The hero was left behind in confusion, thinking that this was obviously not the most pleasant beginning. Meanwhile, in the real world, the situation was not so calm. People were actively discussing something with each other and carefully monitoring social networks. They did it everywhere, at school, at home, on the way to work, or during lunch at their institution. Some people, out of curiosity, looked for information right in bed before going to sleep. Information about the incident that immediately attracted the attention of the world community. And the name of this event is Judgment Day, which, judging by the name, promised the inevitable end of the world. Gamers all over the world discussed this high-profile incident day and night from almost every iron. Everyone was interested in a certain god of war, or master of killing, who committed 2 waves of genocide, one greater than the other. When he was called the strongest in Chrono Life, there were those who were indignant about it all. Some people thought he was just going around the system and using a cheat, and that was pretty close to the truth. Someone said that since 3 million players couldn't defeat him during the second wave, it means he really is the strongest of them. Many agreed, because even with a pumped-up character, it is impossible to defeat such a large number of people. They were all united by only one thing, a huge desire to get rid of the cheater in the game. People actively wrote in support of the game to investigate this matter, and they were delighted when Chrono Life finally responded. And what was the players' bewilderment when the developers responded that, after the investigation, no cheats or bugs were found in the God of Death. Everyone around was surprised by this, but they could do nothing, so they put an end to the issue. The game continued as if nothing had happened, and even this event was almost ignored. Although rumors among the characters could not simply stop. Rumors said that the game server was taken down due to the actions of that very user. People suspected that it was all about the number of the hero's victims who were defeated with one blow. His photographs with the caption "Wanted" were posted all over the streets. But because of the hood, it was difficult to recognize his face. And in the photograph, John really did look quite dangerous. In reality, he was smiling relaxedly from ear to ear. The guy followed Kate at a distance of less than a meter, lazily throwing his arms at the elbows behind his head. It was obvious that his companion was extremely irritated by this rather than pleased. But the hero did not pay any attention to this and continued walking, moving even closer. At some point, the girl couldn't stand it any longer and turned to him, reasonably asking why he was following her. To this, John responded in a relaxed manner that the two of them should already be at the roadstead. The girl screamed that she had not agreed to this, and anyway, she would never go anywhere with such a poor exhibitionist as he. The guy asked again why he was an exhibitionist, to which Kate shouted that he wore only his underwear under his coat. When she added that he also fights with a level 1 stick, John was already standing there, covering himself, clearly offended, and she turned around again and left, repeating that she had no dealings with newcomers. When the girl moved away, John was indignant at why she was calling him names, considering that he had actually saved her from the monsters. Urus, who appeared next to the hero, replied that when his master was killing monsters, she closed her eyes in fear and saw nothing. Memories of that moment and the cowering girl came flooding back to John's mind, and so he guessed that she definitely hadn't seen anything. The guy concluded that the girl apparently didn't understand how strong he really was. While the stranger was leaving, seething with anger, the hero continued to watch her from afar. John was glad when he realized how lucky he was that she was so timid, because he had to hide his strength. Here he quickly ran up to the girl, affectionately calling her little sister. With a stupid smile, the hero babbled in the most sincere plea to her. "Teach me, please." Little sister turned to him and raised an eyebrow skeptically in response. John replied that he had only recently started playing and asked her to teach him, addressing her as a teacher with all due respect. The girl's face immediately changed. She seemed to glow with pride, surrounded by an aura of joy. Her cheeks instantly turned bright red and her eyes sparkled with hope again. She remembered the recent spit from the guild leader, which landed right on her collar, and the terrible attitude of the others. This character rejected her as unceremoniously as the others, although the girl had great potential. A stupid, happy smile touched her lips at the thought that she was now not just a member of some team, but a sensei. At this time, the animal asked what John was doing, and he replied that he was pretending to be a newbie in order to appear weak. The little animal immediately remembered the loser's strategy that they had already discussed at some point. But he was not allowed to finish by another sudden, but this time, enthusiastic squeal from the girl. She threw her hair back with a sparkling smile, saying that she was embarrassed at first, but as a sensei, she was ready to teach him. And the system's voice immediately announced that the character Love had invited John to his team. Smiling smugly, Love added that she could teach him a lesson just once. The guy was given her full information, and it turned out that she was a level 24 hand-to-hand combat master with good characteristics. After some time, the heroes found themselves in the first cave before the city of Front, hidden in its vicinity. From the cave came the sounds of blows and an incessant animal roar. Kate struck a pose and readied her brass knuckles. She easily hit one of the mutants while the others jumped back in fear. This roaring beast was a huge club-footed monster, a cross between a bear and a level 4 hare. After her blow, the monster fell on its back, no longer showing any signs of life. Suddenly, another bear hare appeared behind the girl, ready to attack for his fellow. He pierced the ground with his large paws, but at that moment Kate had already jumped up using her skills. She exhaled, calming the adrenaline that had risen in her blood and thinking about her next steps. With a quick somersault, the girl jumped away from the monsters crowding in one place, and then the girl extended her leg in a complex move, preparing to deliver a powerful blow. With a cry of "Kick of the diving dragon," she struck the next beast with that very dragon. The hares gradually realized that something was wrong with them in their fight with the girl. They immediately ran up to another lifeless body, becoming even more angry at what they saw. Kate assumed a fighting stance, well prepared to defend and attack these monsters. "Attack me! I'm sensei now!" she sincerely rejoiced, throwing them aside with her bare hands. At this time, John sat quietly in the corner with Eurus, hiding in the recesses of the cave. They both noticed that the girl really had excellent skills in fighting such monsters. But the hero said that even if the enemy is weak, you shouldn't let yourself be surrounded, while Kate continued to deal with the monsters with her bare hands. To this, Eurus objected that she simply had good, expensive equipment. The little beast explained that her brass knuckles cost 10 million gold, and the hero noted in shock that this number was equal to real money. All the other equipment was also expensive and totaled around 100 million gold. When the hero asked where the girl got her expensive clothes, Eurus replied, "Obviously, pay to win." John raised his eyebrows in surprise, as if asking a silent question. He remembered Kate screaming about how unfair the players were to her, how she cried, indignant that she had good equipment, and they didn't understand anything. Apparently, she really spent a lot on all of this. John now understood what was going on and wondered why he had to spend 100 million won on gold. Suddenly, Kate pulled him out of his thoughts by calling out loudly. The girl was outraged that the hero did nothing while she was fighting, and so she ordered him to start working with the club. John asked a little tensely whether he should really work with this stick, to which Kate shouted that if the guy wanted to level up even a little, he needed to fight. The girl continued to grumble that this was no way to behave in battle, and the beast appeared behind her again. The hero gave the monster a subtle slap while she was saying he wasn't doing anything. The hair exploded, and Kate continued to mumble without noticing. When only a light breath of wind remained from the beast, the girl turned around. "It's weird, where does the wind come from in the cave?" she asked, while John mentally scolded himself, realizing that the concept of a loser with superpowers was no longer so appealing to him. Suddenly, Kate received a message. Some user wrote that something was starting in 10 minutes and ordered to exit the game. The girl immediately frowned. She obviously didn't like this arrangement. Then she sighed heavily, showing displeasure, but did not say why exactly. Kate turned to the hero and announced that she needed to go out for a while, but later promised to join him. The guy didn't have time to get a word in before the girl disappeared, babbling that she would be there in half an hour, and for now, let John practice. The hero muttered in surprise that she had run away, and Eurus nodded with equal surprise. John wondered who the girl really was to be able to spend 100 million on gold. The pet replied that she was probably born with a gold spoon in her mouth. Thus, the action from the game location was transferred to an evening city in the real world. Inside the building was a hotel with many rooms in a solid beige color scheme. In one of them, on a large, wide, soft bed, lay a girl in pajamas and VR glasses. The system immediately notified her that she was no longer in the game. The girl took off her VR glasses and slightly rose from the warm, comfortable bed. Under the gaming equipment were others. Neat round glasses with red frames. She sighed heavily, lazily looking at her gaming equipment in her hands. The girl went deep into herself, thinking about the past events that had passed so quickly. She remembered the strange newcomer who stubbornly followed her like a little tail, his stupid smile and equally stupid request that she couldn't ignore. And at first the girl was indeed extremely skeptical, but now a slight satisfied half-smile blossomed on her lips. Suddenly, a stranger in a formal suit burst into her room screaming. She was outraged that Kate had not yet taken off her VR glasses and asked if she really wanted to lose her job. The girl shouted back that she had already filmed everything, and the woman called her a gambling addict. She then pointed to a chair and ordered Kate to sit on it, as they only had 10 minutes. But then the woman shouted that her charge had put the VR glasses on over her regular ones again, and the glasses had left dents on her nose again. The girl justified herself by saying she would have a panic attack if she took them off, but the woman would still hide the marks on her nose with makeup. The makeup artist frowned but didn't respond, continuing to stare at her charge. She sighed and grumbled for Kate to sit down already since they didn't have much time. Then she continued to mumble that if it weren't for the size of her salary, she would have already killed both her and herself. The wooden table was covered with a variety of different types of solid cosmetics. The woman carefully removed the red glasses from Kate's neat nose. Although they looked rather inconspicuous on the face, they actually looked expensive. The makeup artist used a trendy glossy powder with the brand engraved on it. She then painted the outline of her charge's lips with a neat brush, dipping it into the lipstick. After completing her makeup, Kate rose from her chair and let down her pink hair, and her long, thick locks of hair in a sparkling style now fell down her back. After some time, the bright light of the bluish spotlights blinded with its flashes from above. The host's voice announced the closing of the festival, which was taking place in that very room. The crowd applauded when they heard that the last act to perform would be the girl who had been #1 in the charts for 13 weeks. The outline of a wooden guitar glittered on the screens as the girl with the title of Best Voice in the World approached the stage. She folded her hands into a heart shape, signaling to the audience the song she would be performing. She looked like a doll, smiling brightly in her neat dress and holding her guitar. The heroine's real name is Sarah, and her real human status is singer and composer. However, despite her universal popularity, no one knew about her true love for video games. At the same time, the sound of massive animal attacks could be heard from afar in the cave. The clawed paws of another monster were approaching John. He chuckled that it was indeed worth practicing a little while Sensei was out of the game. Eurus asked in confusion what his master had in mind, having noticed that the animals were already so close. At this, the guy's grin grew into a wide grin, and he replied that he needed practice in hiding his superpower. The monsters roared at the same time, once again gathering into a huge pile, and John, looking around the assembled crowd, added that he must learn to strike without killing. The shining blow of the club pierced this planet through and through for the second time. At this time, a certain creator from the white space watched what was happening with a grin. "Interesting practice," the man said mysteriously, lazily levitating in space. Looking at the bright flash from the shockwave, the blonde suddenly added that he himself would try something like that. Sarah is 17 in real life and a second grader at a good high school. She came to music school when she was still a little girl and at first did not achieve much success. But now, after mountains of training and sleepless nights, she was being called the best idol and singer-songwriter. During another interview, the host congratulated the girl on holding first place for 14 weeks, and she modestly thanked him. The interviewer praised the lyrics of her song, The Story of the Little Mermaid, and asked how she manages to write such touching lyrics. Sarah, with a charming smile, replied that she loved to sit at home alone, read poetry collections, and just fairy tales. The guy exclaimed that thanks to the interest in fairy tales, it was clear why the story was about the Little Mermaid, and the girl was embarrassed because the manager asked her not to talk about it. Sarah admitted that she actually feels very awkward about having such childish hobbies at such a young age. Her revelation touched the presenter so much that he blushed deeply and opened his mouth in a pleasant stupor. Although he wasn't the only one who was touched by this picture, everyone who was behind the scenes also blushed. Finally, the guy objected that there was nothing shameful about reading fairy tales, and Sarah thanked him. The manager watched all this from the TV screen. The woman drank her black tea gracefully, holding the mug according to all the rules of table etiquette. But in reality, she was outraged by how easily the cunning girl could deceive the entire country. "Poetry? Fairy tales? Nonsense," she muttered under her breath, crossing one leg over the other. Many people didn't actually know about Sarah's true passion, her passion for video games. Meanwhile, the interviewer took the opportunity to ask the girl about her experience acting in the drama. When the guy clarified that it was the role of a foul-mouthed high school student, Sarah smiled faintly. The girl replied that for her sensitive nature, it was a truly difficult role. With the most honest smile, she added that she had never sworn in her life. However, already in the game when she first appeared back, Kate scolded John with the middle finger. The girl kicked the hero, screaming that he was greeting his boss in an extremely inappropriate manner. John asked, momentarily put off, since when had she become his boss? "Now!" Kate hissed, her expression fiercest, and she began to kick and beat him again, asking, does he really have any objections and does he not want to study? Sarah was one of those who relieved stress by playing, and while John was her punching bag, Eurus wondered why the owner tolerated this rude woman. The hero quietly answered the little animal, defending himself, that he had to hide his strength and pretend to be weak. Soon Kate began to line the guy up at attention, forcing him to shout, "Boss love!" Eurus heard her urging him to scream louder, and with a stony face he understood that his master's idea had worked. And so, another short period of time in the game has passed. John and Kate walked slowly into the mysterious, gloomy cave, which now seemed empty. Here the girl decided to ask the hero how long he had been training and fighting monsters, to which the guy sighed heavily. With a face full of pain, he replied that his journey was far from over and that it required incredible patience from him. Eurus, on the other hand, scoffed that the master's fight and don't kill tactics were bad, but John shut him up. Kate laughed and said she couldn't wait to finally see the guy fight the beasts. Then she suddenly realized that she didn't know the name of her student at all, and, having called him Panties, she nevertheless clarified his real nickname. John started to speak and almost said his nickname, but Kate interrupted him again. She said that Panties suited her just fine, while John felt he had been labeled. The girl giggled. The guy sighed sadly, asking why she needed his nickname at all, and someone was watching them from behind. A crowd of people in cloaks and one bearded, red-eyed man at the head, who were clearly hostile. the mysterious, dangerous man quietly whispered under his breath. "So I finally found her." And the heroes argued as if nothing had happened, not paying any attention to the crowd. One of the players in a cloak approached the main one, asking what they should do. The man, without taking his eyes off the couple, replied that he should gather all the guild members in this dungeon. His voice echoed softly off the walls of the cave as the leader added that their justice would be meted out today. On the other side of the cave, another hare was already roaring. His health was at 100% when the beast quickly approached the heroes. Kate ordered John to attack, and the boy, jumping out on all fours shouting "Panties!" rushed at the animal. The guy, on the command of the boss, quickly found himself opposite the irritated monster. The hero screamed loudly at the top of his lungs as if in a voice not his own, attracting the beast to himself. The beast immediately picked up the cry and roared in unison with the boy as his rage grew. Then the hero got tired of straining his throat and ran out of breath, and with that, his cry died down. The guy started shaking all over, pretending that he could barely hold his weapon in his hands. The beast looked skeptically at the raised club and at the hero. The stick approached the bare hare's fur in 1 second. A little more movement, and the club barely touched a small hair on the monster's fur. The contact caused blood to spurt from the beast's mouth and eyes, and its skull to split open from the inside. Now the beast could only open his eyes wide in pain and shock, feeling the blood dripping from his head. The monster then fell dead to the ground next to John. His health points were almost at 0, but the beast was still alive. In pleasant surprise, the hero exclaimed under his breath, "Oh!" examining the animal's body. So the mission, Fight Without Killing, was successfully completed for John, and Kate exclaimed with delight that the hero had made good progress, since he had killed the animal with 1 blow, while Eurus rolled his eyes and the beast begged to finish him off. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a spear appeared and flew towards them. Kate immediately noticed movement out of the corner of her eye, and so she acted immediately. She grabbed the hero's cloak collar sharply, considering her next move. The girl then threw John to the ground, simultaneously kicking the spear in the opposite direction. Like a boomerang, the weapon fell back into the old man's calloused old hands. After this, the villain's grin widened even more. He admired Kate's abilities, but then assumed it was all because of her equipment. And the girl, still holding the hero's collar tightly, choking him, asked who they all were. The laughing man was surrounded from behind by his allies. "Have you forgotten my voice?" mocked the head of the Halasan Volcano Guild, Mr. Kim. Next to him stood the bald Mr. Lee, Mr. Joe with a rich mustache, and Mr. Ben in a mask. On the other side stood Mr. Isaac with an eye patch and Mr. O with bright red hair. "You're from the Halasan Guild," the girl finally exclaimed, realizing who was in front of her. "Long time no see," Mr. Kim retorted mockingly. The man then pointed his finger at the heroes, asking what they were planning to do. Kate asked the hero to hide behind her, because the situation had become really dangerous, and she herself was already getting ready for the fight, getting into a fighting stance and preparing her brass knuckles. A crowd of armed robbers attacked a fragile-looking girl. The guild members drew their sharp blades and swords, gradually surrounding her. But Kate looked forward with determination and without a trace of fear. She swung her leg, preparing to deliver her powerful blow. Using a complex combat technique, the girl kicked the closest opponent in the jaw with 1 blow. The blow caused the man's face to twist in pain and a tooth to fall out of his mouth. But Kate didn't stop. With her other leg, she twisted his neck. And then she jumped up, twisting in the air like a yo-yo. Kate screamed in fury, planning another blow. Using the dragon technique, the girl threw back almost all of the bandits in 1 fell swoop. People were screaming, fighting, groaning in pain. And John and Eurus were sitting separately again. Watching the process, both agreed that they had absolutely no idea what was going on. The guy tried to guess the situation. He said that perhaps the guild boys were trying to get even with love and avenge their previous losses. When he added that the chief didn't know when to finish, the old man was already standing next to the unfamiliar girl. John concluded that he was probably right, continuing to watch as the men's bodies just flew away from Kate's magical kicks. The boy and the little animal laughed at the weakness of the 20-level thugs, who had started a useless fight in which the girl defeated them. The screaming and grunting continued in the background as Mr. Kim and a certain girl watched. The old man confirmed with a grin that everything was going according to plan and ordered the stranger to act. And she had already disappeared, leaving behind a wide, huge column of dust. A moment later, the stranger appeared behind Kate, but the heroine noticed her out of the corner of her eye. The brunette flashed her long, raking claws. Kate looked at her bare arms and assumed that the stranger was from the fighting class. "Theft?" The enemy cast the spell with a predatory, victorious grin. Her palms were illuminated with a golden light from the thief's magic, illuminating the entire cave. The glow blinded Kate for a second, causing her to instinctively cover her face with her hands. A few seconds later, the girl immediately looked down at her palms in shock. However, it was now too late. The brass knuckles were no longer on her hands. "My God, what a wonderful weapon!" exclaimed the thief, who now appeared behind the girl. The brunette noticed that Kate was clearly born with a silver spoon in her mouth, since the brass knuckles of silence cost almost 11,000 gold pieces. John asked in shock what kind of skill it was, to which Urus replied sullenly, "Stealing a thief's class." The little animal was clearly embarrassed by something. He muttered that this shouldn't be the case. To this, John responded in a relaxed manner that he had nothing to fear, since he only had his underpants and a cloak. There was a moment of awkward silence as the boy's words slowly sank in. Gradually, the realization came that a few centimeters away from the hero lay his most powerful weapon in the world. And then he turned to the club, realizing that this was the perfect target for the thief. The smile immediately turned into a strained and much more tense one. The hero suddenly jumped up from his place, which immediately attracted the attention of both girls while they were in the epicenter of the battle. Screaming, he grabbed the stick tightly in his hands and ran as far away from the thief as possible. Mr. Kim told the mercenary that she didn't have to touch the guy. There was nothing to steal anyway. However, the brunette did not answer immediately, but instead paused mysteriously. At this time, John moved further and further away, nervously gripping the club in his trembling fingers. The brunette suddenly perked up, blushing strangely and grinning broadly, almost crazy. She immediately threw the brass knuckles towards the old man, having found a more interesting target for herself. The girl finally replied that he couldn't understand her animalistic thieving instincts. "Stealing from a beggar is even more fun," the mercenary exclaimed enthusiastically, her cheeks still flushed. And in an instant, she found herself opposite the stunned hero, preparing to commit her favorite crime. "Hello, dear," the girl smiled broadly, already preparing her nimble fingers for action. Blushing with lust and anticipation, she asked where John was going in such a hurry. The thief extended her greedy hand towards him, and the hero only clutched the club tighter. John thought hastily that now was clearly not the time to hide his power from Kate, no matter how much he wanted to. His heart pounded loudly in his chest, and his hand was gripped in a death grip on the wood of his weapon. "Die!" the hero screamed furiously, swinging his club towards the girl. The entire area around the hero's blow was hidden behind a thick layer of dust and dirt. Kate and the Hallison Guild members stood frozen in place, watching what was happening. Urus was also clearly surprised by this turn of events and could only watch from afar. The silhouette of the guy finally began to become slightly visible from the thick fog of dust. Only the wooden club was no longer in his hand, and the completely unharmed mercenary stood opposite, calmly waving his weapon. Her sly, victorious smile framed her lips and revealed her neat fangs. Grinning happily and admiringly, she said that this club was now rightfully hers. The horror that flashed across John's face was beyond words. Without hiding her pleasure, the thief added that she would also steal his cloak, leaving him in his underwear. But a sudden rustle forced her to interrupt her monologue, full of confidence in her own superiority. The girl turned around, wondering what had just happened. And then she saw a furious, two-headed monster looking down at her. "How dare you touch me without knowing who I am?" Urus roared, his huge eyes flashing. The mercenary's eyes widened in fear, and her body seemed to freeze in place. She finally recoiled in fright, screaming and falling to the ground, the club falling from her hands. The weapon landed right under the feet of its rightful owner. John just looked down at him for a few seconds, not reacting in any way. Then he finally raised the club into his hand, gripping it tightly in his palm. At that moment, the system notified that Urus refused to surrender to the enemy, and therefore John was now officially the owner of the weapon. "It's just ridiculous," the little animal said sweetly, slipping out of the tree. He grumbled that his master was only John, and in general, how dare this thief even attempt to attack him? Urus was so angry that he even turned red, continuing to curse under his breath. Suddenly, a warm palm gently stroked his woolen head. Urus blushed, not expecting such tenderness from his master, but the hero did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on the heavily breathing brunette still lying in that place. She was trembling all over and pressed herself fearfully into the ground beneath her, unable to utter anything other than interjections. The girl could not understand what had just appeared before her eyes for a split second. It was something mythical, but at the same time too realistic for a ghost. Suddenly, Mr. Kim reminded everyone of himself and joined the conversation, forcing the girl to remember her original job. The thief immediately stood up, answering that she was, in fact, a professional mercenary, hired for money. A shrill female scream suddenly came from her left, distracting her attention from the mission. Kate kicked the ground out from under the brunette's feet, leaving her lying down again. "Give me back my weapon right now!" the heroine hissed furiously, ready to tear and throw. A smile blossomed on the mercenary's face again as she replied that she was indeed scared by such a furious attack. But Kate's weapon, according to the thief, was already in the hands of the leader of the Hallison Guild. And it was indeed so. The brass knuckles flashed enticingly in Mr. Kim's calloused hands. The girl clenched her teeth in anger and was about to rush at the guild members and take back the weapon. Suddenly, she slowly leaned forward onto the ground, unable to finish her obscene threats. After she slowly rolled down, a wooden club became visible behind her back. And so, Kate finally fell down in a knockout, while the hero, seemingly unperturbed, stood behind her with a club in the air. "Skill, fight without killing," the guy said quietly, repeating it once again like a mantra. The mercenary asked, confused, if he was on the same team as Kate. To this, John replied that he hid his power for many reasons. The thief asked what he was talking about when a blow from a club behind her sent the guild members flying in different directions. The explosion left only dust and bodies scattered throughout the cave. The brunette looked around in surprise, observing the terrifying picture. Kate's brass knuckles gleamed neatly next to the lifeless guild members. The thief turned to the hero again, asking if he had done it by accident, to which the hero unceremoniously hit her on the back of the head with a stick. "Yes, I am," the guy's eyes flashed murderously. The mercenary's health points instantly approached zero, just short of reaching complete zero. The hero once again used his favorite skill, fight without killing. While the girl was crawling exhausted, John hissed that he had gone through a lot of bad things to become stronger psychologically. He instinctively tightened his grip on the wooden club in his hand, and he added that because of her he almost had a heart attack. Then the edge of the stick touched the back of the thief's head again, and this time, a golden glow was visible from afar from the cave. Meanwhile, Kate found herself somewhere outside, sleeping peacefully on the grass. She gradually began to wake up, sleepily muttering something under her breath. Suddenly, the girl jumped into a fighting pose, practically waking up. John sat relaxed behind the tree next to her, asking if she was already awake. "Panties?" the girl asked again, searching for him with her eyes. The guy was calmly chewing a chicken leg, sitting leisurely behind a large tree. Kate asked where they both were and where the guild members had gone, to which John replied that the bandits had already left and the heroes were in a field near the dungeon. The girl was puzzled as to how they could just leave and tried to understand how she had fainted. However, the guy refused to answer her questions and simply ignored them. Instead, he threw the blue brass knuckles right into her hands. Now the weapon is back in the hands of its rightful owner. A little surprised and touched by this gesture, Kate looked at her own palms. Suddenly, John stood up and approached her, asking, "Was that the Hallison Guild?" He continued asking what they were doing, who they were, and what they were doing in general. Kate suddenly blushed deeply, feeling his heroic aura, before she had time to think about an answer. But then she grabbed the student by the cheek, asking why he decided to play tough. And yet, a slight blush remained on her cheeks as she exhaled with relief. "Okay, I'll tell you, since you got involved in all this because of me," Kate answered, turning away. Turning to him, Kate asked if the hero had heard anything about P2W. The guy was taken aback at first, but then reasonably asked what it was. "Pay to win. They use it in games," Eurus immediately answered the guy. John was surprised that a simple NPC like him even knew about such a thing. The little animal added with a selfless smile that he had read about this term on NamiWiki. The dragon launched into a huge and insanely long tirade about what the term meant, but his long monologue was interrupted by Kate. "P2W is about people who spend billions on games," she said, as if cutting off the answer. And so it dawned on the guy that the people from the guild were P2W players, and Kate confirmed it. The girl said that she had accidentally bought her knuckle dusters at an auction a few months ago, and then the Hallison Guild began to pursue her in order to take the weapon away. However, she immediately laughed that they were actually just old swindlers with terrible skills, so she always won against them, and the hero joined in the chuckle. But Kate couldn't help but be surprised at how the guy was able to return her brass knuckles, and John frantically began to think about how to justify himself. Well, they just forgot about them and ran away. "Yes, that's how it happened," the hero mumbled uncertainly, which didn't convince her at all. Having resigned herself, the girl sighed and said that the robbers would return in any case, because the old man's obsession had already crossed all boundaries. John asked what was so special about her brass knuckles that attracted them. "Obviously because they cost 10 million won," Kate replied. But the hero found it strange that old men who spent billions on the game were obsessed with brass knuckles that cost only 10 million won. When John said this, a thought seemed to strike Kate. "That's definitely not the reason," the hero summed up his words. The night sky, strewn with stars, was illuminated by a crescent moon. Hidden in the shadows behind the treetops was the modest-looking shelter of the Hallison Guild. A sudden, sharp blow inside the estate was accompanied by blood appearing on the body. Mr. Kim was slashed across the stomach, and he wheezed in horror and unbearable pain. The old man immediately fell backwards in front of a certain man in a royal robe. The robber, almost crying, begged his master on his knees to forgive him. The grandfather begged his master to give him another chance. But a menacing-looking man shut him up and called the guild members useless trash. The man added that they had no more time, which meant he would hand over this mission to the 4 divine kings. Mr. Kim's gaze automatically followed the indicated direction. The footsteps of those same divine kings were heard, and one of them asked why the man in the robe was keeping the old man. Then another added that he had already dealt with 3 matters on his own. The interlocutors saw 3 silhouettes of players in rich clothes. The second of the 4 divine kings, whose capital was 1.7 billion, mockingly asked how a guy with only 100 million gold could be in a guild with them. The third on the list, with 1.2 billion, chuckled that this was precisely why they had long wanted to kick the old man out. But their master was too kind. The richest of them, the first divine king with a capital of 2.1 billion, remained silent, crossing his arms over his chest. The second king suddenly leaned closer to Mr. Kim with a crooked smile. "He hired a mercenary, that's why he failed," the man shamelessly mocked him. And the old man remembered the thief and realized that, it turns out, he had been watched all this time. Suddenly, the first king spoke up and said that he himself would take up the previously failed task. He demonstratively straightened his soft red hair, flashing the expensive rings on his fingers. He could easily take the knuckles of silence or any other weapon in half a day. Suddenly, the gentleman in the robe spoke up and chuckled loudly and ominously. Immediately, his laughter turned into uncontrollable, terrible laughter. "Okay," Mr. King finally answered, "and also the real head of the Hallison Guild, whose capital is 12 billion. Filled with a halo of self-importance, the leader ordered the first king to show the true horror of the Hallison Guild. Guildmaster Hallison continued to grin widely, enjoying the moment. At the same time, the fox's eyes flashed decisively, already ready to begin his operation. The third king, who was also an elf, licked his lips in anticipation of an interesting mass battle. And the second king grinned villainously, impatient to arrange a bloody fireworks display. But the pathos of the moment and Mr. King's speech was spoiled by John, who was casually picking his nose. The whole company turned to the unperturbed guy in awkward silence. A moment of silence was followed by a general lack of understanding of where he even came from. And suddenly John burst out laughing, still not removing his dirty finger from his nose. The hero continued to laugh while Mr. King and the kings looked on in confusion. "Who are you, and where did you come from?" the leader of the Hallison Guild asked angrily, looking at the guy with a distrustful gaze. "Try to guess yourself," John answered relaxedly, continuing to pick his nose. Then the guy shook the booger off his finger somewhere in a downward direction. "It'll be hard to hide my power from Boss Love if you keep pestering her. It was hard for me last time too," he said, wiping his finger on Urus, who was silently cursing his master. "4 divine kings? Ha!" John exclaimed, grinning triumphantly. The hero mockingly suggested not to drag it out and end it right here and now. In response to this, Mr. King let out a heavy, almost tired sigh. The man said with shining eyes that John was just a crazy boy who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Before he could give the order to deal with the guy, all 4 kings rushed into battle. The second and third divine kings from Hallison decided to attack first. They instantly approached the hero, who did not move a single muscle on his face during this time. Only a smug grin from ear to ear adorned his lips. The guy already habitually swung his powerful wooden club, directing it downwards. The golden strike pierced through all the opponents in one short moment. Both screamed loudly and doubled over in intense agony from unbearable pain. Although at the same time, from the street outside, everything inside the house seemed quite calm. There was a small forest around the guild's hideout with beautiful blue flower clusters all around. Not far away, the soft sound of familiar, neat coral heels was heard. The silhouette with the staff gradually moved forward, humming a simple, cheerful song. At this time, the strongest one, the first king, decided to attack, already having prepared his long claws. The girl walked forward, continuing to sing, while her black skirt fluttered in the wind in time with her steps. Fox was also pierced by a blow from the club right in the stomach, causing him to double over and fly back. The first of the four divine kings coughed up blood, his eyes rolling back in pain, and the girl outside kept walking and humming, her shiny jewelry and pink hair shining in the moonlight. John grinned widely and madly as he dealt precise blow after blow to his enemies. The long strands of my friend's hair fluttered in the wind along with a light, cheerful song. Suddenly the house split in half, breaking through the roof and destroying everything inside. The girl noticed this out of the corner of her eye and shuddered in surprise. However, she soon opened her mouth again, intending to continue singing simply. But she decided not to continue and finally closed her plump lips. Lilith, in all her glory, was now alive and perfectly healthy, just one level below the goddess of life. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed with a slight half-smile, almost in admiration, anticipating an interesting spectacle. Mr. King furiously commanded all members of the Halasan Guild to attack. The bandits with predatory grins began to surround the hero from all sides. John just sighed boredly, until the calm and semblance of a smile did not leave his face. The wooden club lay in his hand, tightly gripped in a death grip. The guy remembered the time when he was surrounded by 3 million people in exactly the same way. But if the Halasan Guild wanted to destroy the hero, they needed to gather at least that many players. Having said this, the guy once again grinned and waved his weapon. The wind from the impact cut through the air like a boomerang. It landed on the nearest bandit, instantly shattering his jaw. A bright flash from the explosion captured a guild member flying several meters away. But the guy didn't stop there. A bloodthirsty flash appeared in his eyes as he prepared to strike again. A bright golden light engulfed the space where the club had passed like a halo. People, like little flies from a fly swatter, flew away from the place where the weapon touched. The shockwave's vortex reached a large area around itself. Mr. King watched in silence as his men suffered and cried out in agony. He was horrified, sweating from excitement and the realization that now the entire guild would be destroyed. Suddenly, Mr. Kim, still lying in the very spot where he had been struck, addressed him. The old man asked the gentleman to run before it was too late. At this, the leader Halasan gritted his teeth but was unable to utter a word of refutation. The man silently thought about the fact that, apart from Mr. Kim and his subordinates, all the other members of the guild were donators. Looking at the lifeless bodies, he remembered that here the weakest newcomers spent at least 10 million, and even the top 5 guilds could not look down on Halasan. But now Mr. King was sweating more and more from tension and fear. Looking at the blazing blows, the man wondered who John was and how he could so easily deal with any of the guild members. A sudden realization came to the man, and he opened his mouth in shock. "Don't tell me that this is..." Mr. King muttered to himself, becoming even more nervous. "This is the same unknown person about whom there were so many rumors," he guessed. The guild leader examined the hero from behind, becoming increasingly convinced of his outward resemblance to the poster. He remembered the key words that were used to describe a certain killer of an entire continent. And suddenly the man delved into his own memories he started playing in the 2nd grade. The games were much simpler than today, but leveling up was more difficult without quests and raids. Even so, the 9-year-old boy had a lot of fun. His parents scolded him when he spent the whole night playing games, although the man fondly remembered the days when he spent all weekends leveling up his characters with his online friends. But years passed. Mr. King grew up and was no longer that naive boy. Because of his new responsibilities, he no longer had time even for such important things as memories. He came to his senses while sitting in his presidential office, when he was already well over 40. Mr. King sat in his richly furnished apartment, surrounded by an atmosphere of influence and wealth. His state-of-the-art equipment gleamed under the office lamp. Suddenly, his subordinate burst into the office, holding an old white monitor in his hands. Mr. Kim exclaimed with a satisfied smile that he had finally found that very computer. For his hard work, Mr. King wanted to give himself something special: memories. When the old man asked if the boss really wanted to play on an old antique, the man replied that he was a fool and that this computer was recreating the atmosphere. Finally, the director's fingers pressed against the mouse, and his heart began to pound as if he had gone back in time, at the time where the boy met his first love in the form of the very first downloaded game. And now he was sincerely jubilant, like that same 9-year-old child, looking at the old monitor. The smile of euphoria remained on his face for some time, and great interest shone in his eyes. But gradually the lips became narrower and narrower, and the sparkle in the eyes faded with every moment. The jubilation was replaced by rapid addiction, and there was no trace left of the previous emotions. And very soon all his efforts to once again experience the past euphoria completely lost their meaning. Meanwhile, John literally smashed his opponent's face with another blow from a stick. Another blow pierced the ground, and the guild member fell dead with a loud, distinctive thud. The earth around continuously trembled and exploded from the hero's actions, and split apart in the most unexpected places. Mr. King watched the chaos unfolding before him, with an unreadable expression on his face. The man clenched his teeth again and tensely clenched his jaws, either from fear or anger. Lifeless bodies scattered by explosions lay scattered in the cracks in the floor around. Baring his teeth in a grin, John turned around, confirming to himself that he was almost done with this. He looked at Mr. King and Mr. Kim and asked mockingly if they were the only two left. Guild leader Hallasun looked down, clearly unable to say a word. The hero relaxed and tucked his wooden club into his bosom. He exclaimed enthusiastically that such a miserable end had come to P2W players and asked why they were stealing other people's equipment. "Time for a beating, old man," John smiled triumphantly, slowly approaching. These words caused even more sweat to run down Mr. King's face in anticipation of pain. He remembered how, without a drop of doubt, he quickly twirled his finger on the mouse wheel in his office. How he, as if hypnotized, stared fixedly at the screen of the old white monitor. Made an in-game purchase worth around 12 trillion won at one time. He was not the only one who changed under the pressure of the times, although changes affected all areas of his life. There was no longer any need for effort, as it only took 2 clicks to become the strongest, and those who were unable to pay were simply humiliated for it. Director King rose slowly from his chair, resting his palms on the armrests. He walked over to the sofa, thinking that every game he played from then on was the same. And so, he reached the final, critically acclaimed moment when he carefully picked up the expensive VR glasses. Chrono Life, with its versatility and popularity, became exactly this game. No matter how, the man wanted to find something he had long forgotten. He gathered people around him to recreate what remained in the past, became a leader to experience that feeling of victory over life again. And here it is, the lair of the Hallasun Guild. A large table, 4 divine kings, and Mr. King nearby. He became the head of his own large closed community. But now all that was left of this community was its name, and the club was already flying in its direction. However, John did not kill him and hit him as weakly as possible, while comically hunching over and making a face. "Skill? Fight without killing," the hero said calmly, making an even bigger face. Blood gushed from Mr. King's mouth, and he began coughing uncontrollably. Then the man fell to the cold ground with a crash of his golden armor. While he was shaking in pain, unable to rise, Mr. Kim called out to him. And John repeated that the Hallasun Guild was now finished and insistently asked not to bother Boss Love. It irritated him. "I hope we never see each other again, old man." The guy said goodbye, turned around and walked away. Mr. King suddenly clenched his trembling hands into fists. "It's you, isn't it?" he asked hoarsely, rising to his feet. The leader of Hallasun asked if John was the one who destroyed the top 5 guilds and killed 3 million players of the World Alliance. The hero turned around and his expression suddenly became more serious. Mr. King couldn't stand it. He began to laugh nervously and hysterically. Taking a few trembling steps towards the boy, the man asked, "How much money did you spend on this?" "It really takes a lot to have that kind of power," the guild leader continued curiously. The hero listened silently as the old man continued that the boy would soon understand something important. All efforts were spent on searching for something that in fact did not exist at all. Mr. Kim heard these words, surprised by his boss's sudden revelation. The old man was genuinely worried about his boss, even if it was not mutual. Having heard the man's monologue, John asked again what nonsense he was just talking about and added that he himself had also spent a lot of money on the game. Mr. King nervously began to consider how much the hero could have spent on such power. Tens of billions? No, hundreds of billions. And John, standing half-turned to him and looking at him from under his brows, paused dramatically. 55,001 for basic warrior equipment, the guy finally said. At this moment, Mr. King was unable to utter a word. The man stood there in complete stupor, his jaw almost dropping in shock. And the hero turned around and walked away again. His mission as an observer was fulfilled. The expression on the Hallasun Guild leader's face was unreadable for a long time. 55,001. For a warrior's basic equipment? The old man muttered under his breath. His first attempts to play in his distant childhood came back to him again. Those special feelings from passing levels, euphoria and delight. The director smiled bitterly, realizing how pathetic he had actually been all this time. Then the man began to laugh even harder, as if hysterically. Mr. Kim looked up at him with surprise and confusion. Suddenly, the boss asked how many games they played after Lineage, and the old man replied that about 8. The director's bitter grin gradually grew wider. Smiling almost sadly, Mr. King exclaimed that this game was really very interesting. Of course! A familiar, overly gentle female voice suddenly rang out. The guild leader winced, immediately looking for the speaker out of the corner of his eye, and Lilith added that chrono life was divine. The girl waved at him with a sweet smile and remarked that it was quite a nice night.